everyone, my name is Sam. Thanks for checking out this video. If you get to the end and liked it, hit the, thumbs up, subscribe, bell notification button. As the title of this video suggests, I want to talk about the incredibly sexy topic of interlibrary loans. And just like this is not like a political video. You'll understand that thing in a second. It's just an explanation based on something that happened politically in Ontario, and the amount of comments I saw of people not understanding what interlibrary loans are, why they're beneficial, and the value of them, as well as the value of physical books versus digital content. I'm also aware that people that have those ideas basically are not going to be the ones going on YouTube looking for information about this. They just like to say things that they have no information about. But if you're interested in going into libraries, this is going to be a topic that will affect you really basically no matter where you live. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit more of a chaotic video than normal. That happens when I do Rambling Librarian things. It's always when I'm angry about something basically. But I hope I have like a bullet point thing of just all the points I want to make sure I get in. So those will probably be a bit more rambly, hence the name of this like mini series. So let's get started. So sort of like the catalyst of this whole video, Ontario currently has a conservative government under a gentleman named Ford, and they just released their budget for this current year, and library services for the Ontario Library Services, like they have one for Northern and then Southern Ontario library programs, was cut by over 50%. Now their budget in all was like $3 million, I think, total. They lost like $1.5 million. So $3 million, a lot of the budget cuts are normally to balance the budget. You're not balancing a budget by cutting $1.5 million from your library services. So just to clarify, your local libraries are normally funded by your municipality, by your city, by your town, based on your population numbers. And then there's this thing, it's almost like how we're kind of structured in Alberta, where they have this larger conglomerate, which kind of does bigger consortium sort of things, such as interlibrary loans. If you don't know what interlibrary loans are, it's commonly abbreviated to ILL. We are a profession that loves abbreviations. You've noticed that probably by now. It allows you to borrow, you may live in a small hillbilly town. We'll say Erin, Ontario. I don't even know if they have a library there. But if you do have a library in the small town or village of, maybe 3,000 people, your library is restricted to whatever in your physical building, whatever your budget is. And so you're kind of just whatever you have. And again, a lot of these small communities don't normally have bookstores. So libraries are basically your only option, or you have to buy things off of Amazon, which can get expensive very quickly because we've established on this channel books are atrociously expensive in Canada, and then they are taxed as like a luxury item, I think, in most places too. So it does deter people from purchasing books. It deters me from purchasing books, and I have like an actual salary. So people that living on minimum wage or just hourly, it's not really reasonable to expect them to be buying a lot of that stuff. So interlibrary loans allow these small libraries. And realistically, who is going to be impacted by the loss of that interlibrary loan is going to be those small communities. It's not going to be Toronto Public Library. It's going to be, small communities, or these counties where it's a lot of farmland and people just go back and forth between like 4 or 5 different library branches. You can no longer borrow a book from Toronto Public Library and have it sent to your library. You just either no longer have access to the book now, or you have to go buy it. Which is incredibly unfortunate. It's also fiscally irresponsible. The big thing being, it was the provincial government that paid for those interlibrary loan services. So probably the saddest part of this is that all of those people that did interlibrary loans, who drove the books from all of these different places, have lost their jobs. So there's now 24 people that were either part-time, full-time, or contract that no longer have income, which is incredibly disappointing. But on top of that, you are no longer, as a library, getting those services from the provincial government. That does not mean that you are now getting money in a different capacity. The money you have to spend on books is the exact same amount as it was before. So you now have more people wanting your in-house collection or wanting it to grow, which may not be doable because of your budget. You just don't have more budget. You're not getting an extra $1.5 million from the provincial government now, split between the libraries. You just have that loss of service, and you now have more demand, and you have the same purchasing budget as you did before. Libraries also don't expand their buildings. We are stuck a lot of the times. I actually don't know of a single library that I've walked into where it's the size they needed. I actually know of several libraries that were put in renovated buildings, and the buildings were purposely, when they renovated them, were made smaller, despite the library needing the bigger size. It's a common thing. We just don't ever get enough size. We don't ever get enough budget. That is just libraries 101. So you don't have the size or the budget. So a lot of the times that's when your digital stuff will pop in. However, that seems like a simple thing when you think about, oh, just space issues. I've talked about it on this channel before. E-content is more expensive than physical content. Once again, you're not getting more money for your collection budget, and in fact, when you buy a physical book, we normally get to purchase the physical books for less than their shelf value. So when I go to a bookstore to buy a YA book, it'll be like $25. When a library purchases, for the most part, especially when you're in consortiums, when you do purchasing from large distributors, you will maybe pay $15 or $20. So you get a discount and you're just paying that flat rate there. So I have that physical book in my possession now. It's on my bookshelf. I can borrow it. You know, all of my patrons can borrow it. Patrons from other libraries can borrow it. And we have it. And when we need to replace it, we can judge that. Some books, they need to be replaced every 5 borrows, especially children's books. The wear and tear on them is quick. However, if you have a book that, you know, people just take generally good care of it, or if it's reference material, you may not have to replace that one for several years, if ever. It's really up to how people take care of the books, and that's, you know, case by case and community by community basis. We've talked about this on my channel before, but as I said, e-content is insanely expensive. Yeah, you take up less physical space. Absolutely. You normally are also stuck with a specific distributor. They don't let you buy that content and then leave with it. If you buy all these books on Overdrive or RB Digital or Axia 360 is another one, most of the time you lose that content if you ever leave that platform. So once you start sinking in $65 minimum for an ebook, you are stuck with that platform, because if you leave, all of that money disappears and all that value disappears. Now, something I saw, for the most part, libraries across the province over this weekend especially were announcing on their social media saying, please be aware, we no longer have access to interlibrary loan services. Please return any interlibrary loans you have. Anything pending has been canceled. You will not be getting those books. And it's unfortunate because they had to cut the budget. That is what was cut, unfortunately. The saddest part was that they had basically no notice that this was coming. They were told one day, by the way, your current budget has been cut in half, basically. So really, when you do that without giving libraries no notice, they only have a limited amount of things that they can then drop because of contracts. If you have contracts with certain vendors that are valid until 2020, you can't just not fulfill them because you lost your budget. You have to then look to things that aren't under contract. Now, for the most part, everyone I saw responding to this information that was posted by on their Facebook pages was upset, sad, disappointed, frustrated, that, of course, education is always the first thing to get cut. Whenever there's budget issues, it's always education. It's always tax cuts for wealthy, and education gets cut, which is just history of the world, unfortunately. But I saw probably like just a handful of people making comments like, we don't need libraries. When was the last time you went to a library? And, oh, just download it. First of all, in Ontario, they just made changes to education so that to complete your high school diploma now, you have to do online courses. That is a problem in itself because you are assuming that everyone has at-home devices and at-home internet, which is very commonly not the case. A lot of schools also don't have school libraries, so you can't do that. So you're literally sending children to their local library to do services. So you're going to have an increase in usage of interlibrary loans, of everything. So you're requiring them to go to libraries and then cutting library funding. So you're stopping and restricting the services that are going to be made available to those people, which is a pretty blunt shot at the value you see in education. So that's just something to be cautious of, that even if you yourself live in Toronto area, not everyone has at-home internet. It may literally just not be available. This is really common, especially in Indigenous communities and farming communities, that they literally just don't have the infrastructure to purchase internet. It's insanely expensive in Canada. We have some of the highest, if not the highest, internet bills in the world. It's just the same thing with cell phone. We have insanely expensive internet here and not great quality for the amount of money we pay for it. Then there's also the fact that some people just don't have cell phones, tablets, or smartphones. And then on top of that, we have the potential issue of people have disabilities, learning disabilities, reading disabilities, you know, a variety of things. Another issue that's going to be hit is people do homeschooling. It's actually quite a common thing in Alberta, especially in our area, that people do homeschool their children. It's for a variety of reasons. A lot of the times our communities are so small that they themselves don't have a high school. They may have an elementary school that, all, 5 surrounding communities pool into, but they generally, a lot of the time, won't have an actual high school. So you have to do distance learning or homeschooling. And a lot of those times you need information and access to resources. And I don't know what it's like in Ontario, but in Alberta, we're actually really lucky that we do have interlibrary loan services that allow public patrons to borrow from academic libraries, which is insanely valuable. I also saw some people saying things like, well, why don't we just mail things? When you mail things, you have to send them through like Canada Post. Canada Post is notoriously expensive in Canada, as well as you're going to have to be packaging them very safely and likely dealing with higher rates of damage than you would with having your own staff handling things. It's something that we see here on the few libraries that we do have to do mailing to. It's expensive, insanely expensive, far more expensive than having a manned program delivery service yourself, and a lot of the times things just get damaged a lot more than they would otherwise. In generally, the concept of just download it just isn't it really doesn't have any correlation. It's not a replacement thing. Just download it. You don't have more of a collection budget. Your budget is staying the exact same amount as it was before when you were dependent on interlibrary loan services. E-content is more expensive than physical content. A lot of the times things like children's books or anything with pictures don't format properly onto ebooks. Ebooks, you are now restricted to that specific site. You never really own things. You're basically just purchasing them to use on someone else's platform. And then in that, you're expecting that everyone has at-home internet and devices, which, especially if you have senior populations, is a massive, massive issue, as well as you're assuming that children who are younger have devices, which is not always the case, and it's actually something that people are constantly fighting against kids having iPads, so that's just a thing. I think just overall in this sort of rambling is remembering that even if you don't use your library usage across like everything I've seen, every department, every actual geographic library has gone up. Usage has gone up across the board. Part of it, I'm going to assume, is the cost of internet combined with the low income that millennials and such my age have, and just the rising cost of everything else. If you can cut certain things and substitute it with a public service, that's what people are doing. As well as libraries are offering more programs now, whether that's movies and video games and cooking classes, and renting bikes, and having 3D printers in the library, and doing STEM science program, and computer information sessions. All of these things, more people are going to the library. And in fact, in 2013, the Toronto Public Library did I don't know what the specific term is, but they got like a value assessment, which is a little difficult to find out for libraries, as you can imagine, the usage statistics, as well as people use the library and don't have library cards sometimes, so it's a little difficult to figure out. But they hired someone professionally to do this. Be aware there are actually a decent amount of libraries that have done this. It's normally only larger libraries because it does cost money to get a company to come in and do this. As well as keeping in mind, Toronto Public Library is they're not the one that's going to get hit really, really hard with this interlibrary loan program. It's going to be the small libraries that are going to get hit hard, and there's a lot of small libraries. But the thing is, someone like Toronto Public Library, all libraries are going to be a bit different, but in 2013, so this was like 6 years ago now, so I'm sure it's actually gone up. For every dollar that the Toronto Public Library got, they returned over $5 in value to their community. So whether that's like training entrepreneurs who go into business or helping students finish education, all of these different fields, when you put money into your library, it benefits the community in a variety of different ways, which then trickles out into all these other industries. So that's just something to remember. And finally, if you disagree with things like that, remember this when you vote. It's really important to vote. We just had our provincial election here in Alberta this week, and we had I think our area is about 70,000 people, and we only had like 20,000 people actually vote. So 30-ish% or so of the population gets to decide what someone does to represent this entire population. But the thing seems to be people only turn out when they're angry, rather than when they're trying to prevent things that will make them angry. So remember that a lot of you in first world countries where women especially and people of color are lucky enough to get to vote. I know there's some issues in some countries where voter suppression is a thing, but especially in Canada, we had like weeks sometimes. We have at least a week of advanced polling, we have distance voting, and then we have like voting, the actual voting day, which is like 13 hours of time to go vote. So just vote. There's so many quizzes online that you can take to just say like, fill in these like hot topics that are in your province and see where you stand. And if you're going through that and you don't know what something is, then just go Google it. And you can always go and defer your vote too. If you show up and you don't like any of the candidates, at least it shows that you made an effort. If you just no-show, they just assume that you don't care enough to vote. So that's my spiel thing. And especially remember to vote in your local elections. This Ontario thing is a provincial thing, but remember your city councillors, your mayors, your local MPs and all that such. They represent you. Just remember that. Soapbox speech, and yeah, just appreciate your interlibrary loans and appreciate your libraries and everything that they do.